Storytelling and interviewing are two huge topics for podcasters, and that's exactly what I'm diving into today. I'm joined at my live event, Podcasters Northwest, the biggest networking event for podcasters in Seattle and the Pacific Northwest. I'm joined by Erica C. Barnett from Seattle Nice and Publicola, and Ronit Plank, one of my clients and the host of Let's Talk Memoir. We sit down at Armoire in front of a live audience to talk about the topic of interviewing and storytelling. I put together this panel because we are all very different in the way that we tell stories and interview. So, for example, Erica C. Barnett is a journalist. So she approaches podcasting from a journalistic standpoint. Then my other guest, Ronit Plank, is a storyteller and memoirist. And the way that she approaches interviews is by reading people's memoirs, doing that deep research, and finding out not just the story, but how they wrote the story. So it's a lot of more deep research than I do on my show, which is the third perspective. Whenever I go into an interview on this show, I do lead with curiosity. It doesn't take a ton of prep work for me. And that's intentional because since I'm working on so many other shows as a podcast producer on 25 other podcasts, if I'm going to spend time on my own show, it has to be something that lights me up, is light, fun, and I just go into it with curiosity and pull out the best stories from people and talk to podcasters about their shows. So I kind of have a rhythm on this show. If you're a longtime listener, you know that. You know what to expect. So since we all have different perspectives, I wanted to pull us all together to have this conversation. So we're at Armoire, which is a clothing rental company and the sponsor of this month's Podcasters Northwest. They gave a code for a free month, Podcast 2026. So if you have ever thought about renting clothes, I'm a huge fan of renting clothes. Check out Armoire and claim that free month. So I want to give a big thank you to everyone who came live to this event, and I want to invite you to the next event. It's July 22nd in Georgetown in Seattle. The location is at the Stables in Georgetown. I'll put the link in the show notes. And my guest for that is Amanda Marks. She is the podcast guest on this show next week, so tune into that as well. But Amanda is the host of Solo in Seattle. So we're going to talk about community building when you really need it and through a podcast, because she was going through tough relationship changes and started this podcast. And it has brought her a whole community that she wouldn't have had otherwise. So sometimes all you need to do is put yourself out there, share your voice, share your message, and people will come to you. So that's going to be July 22nd. I would love to see you there in person. Okay, and if you're not here in Seattle, no worries. You'll hear it on the podcast. Okay, enjoy this conversation with Erica C. Barnett and Ronit Plank.
Our event tonight is hosted by Hayleigh Hayhurst, founder of Espresso Podcast Production. Hayleigh started podcasting in 2018 while studying journalism at University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and turned her love for talking into a full-time career. For the past 6 years, she's been helping brands, entrepreneurs, and creators launch and grow podcasts with strategy-first production support. She's the host of podcasts Employee to Boss and Podcast Cafe. She's created Podcasters Northwest because she wanted more in-person connection and community for podcasters and creators here in Seattle.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we're here to talk all about the art of interviewing and storytelling, which these two amazing guests are incredible at. I want to introduce them before we get into the conversation. First is Ronit Plank. Ronit is a writer, teacher, and editor whose work has appeared in The Atlantic, Poets and Writers, River Teeth's Beautiful Things, The Rumpus, Salon, Hippocampus, The New York Times, and elsewhere, earning Best of the Net, Best Microfiction, and multiple Pushcart Prize nominations. Her memoir, When She Comes Back, which will be given to one of you tonight, was a Book Riot Best True Crime Book, which Kirkus Review calls an intimate, intuitive, emotionally vivid family account that finds hope in reconciliation. She is also the author of the award-winning short story collection Home is a Made-Up Place, the creative nonfiction editor at the Citron Review, and teaches memoir at a host of venues, including the University of Washington's Continuum program, Talk University, and Wise Roundtable. She has been a podcast host since 2017 for shows including And Then Everything Changed, The Body Myth, and currently hosts Let's Talk Memoir, now in its 8th season. Not included, we've worked together for the past, I think, 5 years.
Yes.
So.
I was going to mention that when we talk as a group, but I've been working with Hayleigh. She's been my producer, editor since like 2021.
Yep. Yes, I've listened to a lot of her podcast episodes.
Whoa,
I love it.
Person.
It's amazing. It's kind of like funny hearing your voice in person when I just like edit it all the time. You know, so fun. Okay, and then Erica C. Barnett is a longtime journalist and editor of Publicola, a Seattle-based news and politics that she co-founded with her colleague Josh Fiat in 2009. She co-hosts a weekly podcast, Seattle Nice, with her former colleague at The Stranger, Sandeep Kaushik, and former KUOW producer, David Hyde. Prior to starting Publicola, Erica worked as a reporter and editor in Texas and Seattle. Her book, Quitter, a memoir of drinking, relapse, and recovery, is in its 5th printing, and also someone will leave that with that tonight. So let's give a big round of applause for Erica and Ronit.
Can you tell that I'm like sort of over writing my bio? Like I'm old. I don't need much of a bio anymore.
I love it. So tonight is all about storytelling, which these two amazing guests do amazingly. So we all came to podcasting for very different reasons: community building, journalism, and business growth. And I want to know, what keeps you going and showing up behind the mic long after the excitement of launching a podcast wears off? Because it does wear off.
I mean, I was not a very excited podcaster to begin with. I kind of got dragged into it after Sandeep and I went on KUOW, and we had a very feisty argument. We're on different sides of the Seattle political spectrum. And David Hyde from KUOW said, you guys should start a podcast. And so we did. And I think, you know, it just kind of kept growing, and I guess the vibe just kept getting better and better between us as we got more familiar with each other and sort of learned how to talk to each other and not to yell at each other. And what keeps me coming back is it's hearing people say, you know, there's like a parasocial thing where people hate me or hate him. Mm. And I find that very fun. Like, I love that. I love it when people are like, you know, I think Sandeep is really smart, but you're an idiot. You know, I mean, usually they're much more polite than that. I'm paraphrasing very much. But I love that people have such strong feelings about it, and they feel very engaged, and they feel like they know us. And I get recognized now for Seattle Nice, which is really strange for me because I've been running a website and been a public person in Seattle for 25 years, but people really respond to podcasts in a way that is just completely different than the way they respond to the written word. So I love that.
Yeah, that's so interesting. What about you, Ronit?
I was thinking about this answer because an immediate one did not come to mind when I read the questions, and I thought, well, the first one is that I really get excited about holding a microphone, and I told you that. I used to do the announcements in my second high school. I got the award for Voice of Schreiber, and I was so excited about that because I'd be like, today in the gym, and I was 17 and I loved it. So maybe there's that. I used to act, so maybe there's that. I'm a communicator. I'm a teacher. It might be that. And I have done some other podcasts before. I had a few that ran for a while, and then I realized I wanted to get a niche podcast. I had this show called And Then Everything Changed, and I'll tell you, when you build it, they come, because all of a sudden people started pitching me for And Then Everything Changed, which was not a huge podcast, but it did okay. I was consistent. And people would just send me these pitches to be on my show. And then I got tired of that after a while. It was a lot of work, and my memoir came out, and I was teaching more and learning memoir more. So I went to a convention at She Podcast Live. I spoke there, And then I went to a panel on niche podcasts, and it was just light bulb. I want to stop, and then everything changed. I want a niche podcast, memoir. And I just did a quick search, memoir, and I didn't see anything. I mean, there are some things that have memoir in them. And I just launched. And I said to Hayleigh, I'm switching. Let's do a 15-episode limited series. Let me just see if I like it. And I simultaneously launched The Body Myth because I don't know why. It's not like I have nothing to do. And so that, too, was a 15-episode limited series.
Wait, but before she says how many episodes she has, someone guess now after the... Somewhere between the two.
Yeah, I have right now, what is it, 246?
246.
Yeah, I have 246 of Let's Talk Memoir. And
Is that not insane?
well, I mean, it isn't, I mean, you have a ton too, right? Like it accumulates. So there's no quick answer, but what I want to give you something useful, which is that I kind of launched the show with Hayleigh's help. I did it right this time. I had a trailer. We like figured it out. I wasn't just drinking out of a fire hose. And soon I had my first couple of guests, and then soon people started reaching out. They saw it, writers in my community, and they said, can I come on? And I said yes. And then soon publishers started sending me books, and soon agents started reaching out to me. And then I was like, what is happening? And I don't mean like I had, Michelle Obama's agent or publishing house calling me, but still, like, I did not have to hustle for guests because people want to be on a podcast.
And this was before AI, because I'm sure if you have a podcast, we're getting 1 million AI pitches every single day. And this was before all of that.
Hayleigh had to tell me about AI podcasts. I didn't even know about that. I was like, what? Egads? Like, no. But long story longer, and I'll stop talking, but I basically did it because it keeps accumulating and more doors open for me because of it. It's not that much work because I have Hayleigh. It is my time. I read all the books. I come up with all the questions. I write all the show notes. I do all that. But it makes me a better teacher. It makes me a better learner. It makes me a better writer. And I'm building community with writers I haven't maybe even met in person yet. So it's just sort of a good loop.
Yeah. So on the point of interview styles, Ronit reads all the books. She sends the questions in advance to the guests. She does that process. Where Erica does not send the questions in advance. And that's from a journalist viewpoint, right? And that makes sense. And I go into the interviews kind of just with curiosity, and I'm like, let's see where this goes. There's not like a long plan with it. And so all of us have different interview styles. So I'm wondering, how did you each develop that approach and know that it works for your clients or for your listeners?
Yeah, I mean, as a journalist, we generally don't share questions unless I'm going to be interviewing somebody over email, and that is not preferred. And I'm talking about just in my life as a journalist, not a podcaster. And so, we probably have guests on. We didn't start out having any guests. It was just the three of us. And we started having guests on, and and we get all those pitches too. And we get we sort of share like the most ridiculous pitches. Like, why would we want somebody like to talk about their mold removal company on a show about Seattle politics? But yeah, so we don't share the questions. I do a lot of research when we're interviewing somebody, and we probably do that, 1 out of 5 podcasts now, and it's every week, so it's still pretty often. And the reason I don't share questions is, first I want people to be fresh. I don't want them to have thought about it. I really hate it when people go on the radio or a podcast and they are reading from an answer that they have prepared in advance. I think it sounds really fake. But I will say, I do, it's a friendly environment. Even if there are, somebody's coming on who has a view that's, adversarial to what one of us think about an issue, we're like, here's what we're going to ask you about in general. Sometimes, and maybe we'll talk about this, but, there are spontaneous questions that come up that I have not written. It's not all scripted. But people kind of know that, I'm not going to, be exposing Watergate on my podcast. Sure. If people know what Watergate is still. So it's kind of in between, and also a lot of times we are doing reporting on the podcast to some extent, so we're trying to get new information out there that I might not have on my website, but I want to get it out in a different format, and then I can write about it, and then I can put it on Blue Sky and Instagram. So I want a more spontaneous kind of answer, and you get that by sort of not over preparing people for factual type interviews.
Yeah. No, it's a very interesting approach for sure, and it is journalism. Like, my background is in journalism, and that's the same. Like, you don't send them the questions beforehand. But there is still, like, that level of prep that you're talking about of, like, the topics, or at least knowing that you're interviewing an expert on that topic so they can't answer anything that you're throwing at them.
Yeah, and a lot of times it's something that just happened in the news. So we'll be like, we want to have you on to talk about this new policy that just happened. And so, yeah, they know they're there to sell, and we're there to a little bit to throw them off their game, to, like, try to get them to answer unexpected questions. But they know that we're not, like, if we ask a question and they don't know the answer and they're afraid of looking stupid and they're like, I just really can't answer that, we're not going to put that on tape, We're like, okay, that's fine.
Totally.
Like, we'll just change topics.
Totally. Yeah. What about you, Ronit?
And then everything changed, which was about pivotal moments in your life and events that kind of alter the trajectory of your life. It was really about being vulnerable, because I was very interested prior to the Memoir podcast in exploring resilience. I know these are buzzwords for us now, but this was pre-COVID. I mean, we knew about resilience, but not the way we talk about it now.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to know, how do people survive? And I think that came out of my own story of having, what happened to me in the memoir, and so I just want to know, how do people do it? How do people, overcome and become who they are? So I would do a pre-interview with them, actually, which was a suggestion of one of my friends who's a documentarian, and now in hindsight, it's really time consuming. So I would pre-interview just to vet the person, to get a sense of their story and make sure there was some depth there. And then I'd be like, okay. And then I'd send them we'd schedule the appointment for the interview, and I'd send them questions sort of in advance so that they would know. And that was a holdover with Let's Talk Memoir. But with Let's Talk Memoir, I will send them, it's always a standard opening. Can you share a little bit about, if it was Erica, and she was on And Then Everything Changed, actually. We met a long time ago, and she blurbed my book for me. So I read her book when she was on my podcast, blah, 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 and now here we are. Okay,
And I didn't know that when I put together this panel.
Yeah. So. She's like, oh, Erica C. Barnett and you were going to be in conversation. I said, in person? That's nice. So, so my opening is always, can you share a bit about your memoir? And then I take it from there. That'll be very specific. And then I always send them excerpts that I want them to read. And I check, are these excerpts okay, just in case? Or like, this is what I'm hoping you'll read. And I always end with the same 3 questions, just so my listeners I just sort of fell into this. I'm no mastermind. I just was like, well, this will be a predictable format. And the end is like, what advice would you like to share with memoirists? What books would you like to recommend that informed your writing process? Where can people get a copy of your book and connect with you so they can promote? And in between there, I have questions about their personal life and their experience of writing, so that the people listening can learn how to possibly write a memoir themselves. So I'm trying to be useful and not fluff, just all fluff, but I also don't want to just talk about writing. I want to get into some heart there. So I don't know if I answered the question.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of, I mean, the way I do interviews, and I'm going to be so honest, I don't love doing a lot of prep before the interviews. I know that my show doesn't hold like the same responsibility as a political podcast, and it doesn't need as much research as a memoir podcast. And so I'm interviewing podcasters, right? I look up their show, I do a research, I maybe will listen to an episode of their show, like one of the most recent ones. And then I have a structure of questions that I go into that every guest of mine answers. So I kind of just like go where the conversation flows, and that makes sense for me. If I had to prepare a lot for my podcast, I'm going to be honest, with all the client podcasts that I have and I'm editing, that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It needed to be low stress, but like high value for me. So that's my approach to the interviewing. So my next question is, every memorable episode has that moment that changes the conversation. And a story arc is what I think a lot of podcasts sometimes are missing. It's just like a conversation that goes nowhere, or just like a flat conversation that's not memorable. So I want to ask about the story arc. How do you find that in real time when you're interviewing someone?
Well, if I can sort of make a diversion from my main podcast. So I did a 6-episode podcast. It was supposed to be a 12-episode podcast. Didn't happen. Whatever. It's fine. But there's this movie I'm obsessed with called Shattered Glass. It's about a journalist, a scandal that happened in the late 1990s in journalism at the New Republic. And so my friend and I, who is also obsessed with this movie, decided to make this podcast just about the movie. And honestly, we should have had an outline of episodes and planned a little bit better, because we had no idea what we were doing. We're just we're going to watch the movie every month and then talk about it. And it turns out that's not sustainable. It's really boring after a couple episodes. So we started interviewing people. And so when I was interviewing, we got the director to come on. And this is a major movie, believe it or not, in 2003. It was a big release, and this is a serious director. And I was there's no way he's going to talk to us. But he immediately agreed. And we're talking to him, and I've just done so much preparation. And we both have all these questions, and we're so nervous, and we don't want to waste this guy's time. And we had previously interviewed some of the people that are the real life people behind the characters in the movie. And posted these podcasts. And anyway, this director, Billy Ray, the first thing he says to us is, "Why the F did you have them on your podcast before me?" And he said it in a funny way. I know I just said that, it sounds very scary, but he was just kind of joking around with us. And it turns out he had all the time in the world, and he couldn't believe that somebody was making a podcast about his movie. And he was so excited to talk to us. And we ended up talking for 2 hours. We had to edit it way down, but he was amazing. And I was expecting we have 30 minutes with this guy. He's still a big time Hollywood dude, but he was so nice and so casual and so relaxed that it just changed the interview completely. And we did kind of more what you're saying. There were still some questions we got to, but it happened a little more organically, because we were just oh, we're just having a conversation with our friend Billy Ray in Los Angeles, And so that I was trying to think of a good example of that, because Seattle Nice is pretty structured. It's very short. But yeah, that was just an amazing interview, because it was not what I expected at all.
That's so fun.
I think I would like to play off of that, which is the surprises. In case we don't get back to this, you can be so surprised by people, and so surprised by behavior, and so surprised by yourself. And when you take those moments and you don't have a preconceived notion about how someone will be. And I catch myself, I have to be open and vulnerable too, as a teacher working with these really personal manuscripts, and also as a listener, I need to be an open host. And so I feel when someone does something like that and you go with it, right? You just went with it, and then you created this thing you didn't even expect, because he was such this was not something you thought he would be like, which who would have ever thought that? For me, I think when I used to do the old podcast, I'd save the really hard questions or the maybe tough or really personal questions for later, for after we'd warmed up. So a holdover from that, if we want to talk about ARC, is that I know that I'm going to start soft, and I know I'm going to end up with logistics. So somewhere in there, I know I want them to read once or twice from their book, which is for them and also my audience. And I know I want to get into some meatier questions, so I'll save them for the middle or the end. So, and I'll check them first. And I actually had 2 people, and I think we'll talk about this in a couple of questions, who kind of changed their mind about what they wanted to share, and or weren't willing to, but they'd written about it, and I was like, that's interesting. So I'll respect that. But if someone is offering something about a difficulty they had with a family member, a sister, a mother, a relative that they didn't understand reacted badly to the memoir, and I asked them something about sharing publicly their story, and they'd say something like that, I'll dig in and I'll say, well, what happened? But I can vibe it out. I know that they've offered it, and I can tell that they're ready to answer it. And if they ever said to me, I don't want to talk about this, I have Hayleigh to edit it in post-production. So it's always going to be cleaned up. But I think some of the awkward things are good. Someone cried on an episode with me recently. You just edited that one. It's the current episode. And I have to tell you, as an interviewer, I was like, yay! Because they used to cry on, and then everything changed a lot. And I was like, yes, which I know sounds ruthless. But with Memoir, this Memoir podcast, my goal is not to make people cry, but I was so happy. I made a lot of people cry last week. Just
in general.
Yeah, the people I was Zooming with for teaching, a couple of them cried. I was like, I got something going on, but I wasn't being mean. I just must have been very I don't know, open or something. Yeah. So anyway, she cried, and I was just like, oh, I love my job.
Wait, I love that, because I feel as an online business owner, when you get your first hate comment online on social media, that's when you've truly made it, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you make someone cry on a podcast, that's when you've made it as a podcaster. It's
I don't think we've made
a
checklist. Yell at us, maybe.
Same. Maybe after. Who knows? After the mic turns off. But yeah, to that next point of when someone is challenging the way that you're interviewing or not wanting to go the way that you're interviewing. And I've had this happen before too, where I think we're going to go in one direction and they're like, keep bringing it back to like a different part. I have that happen on my show, not like super often, but when it does happen, it can be awkward and it can kind of like put you off your game. But I'm wondering, when a guest shuts down, goes off script, or something happens very surprising, how do you handle it, and what does that teach you?
Well, I love your example of like people trying to come back to the script, because that drives me nuts. And I'm like, I know you're here to like sell whatever it is. I mean, it's not a product, but it's like a policy or themselves as a candidate or whatever. And that is something that, when that happens, I think we do very much, like, we'll be pretty blunt and say, look, we're here to talk about, like, we've covered that, and we're here to talk about this other thing now. But, I mean, I would say that in general, this does not happen much on the podcast, but I can bring it back to, like, my interviewing that I do as a reporter. There are lots of people, like, you would not believe how rude they are willing to be to a reporter. Like, I had a person, I'll just be that vague, a person call me the other day, and like the first thing, I mean, just mid scream at me, just like launched in and like screamed at me for 5 minutes. And that does happen in interviews, like a fair amount, not a fair amount, but every now and then, like somebody will just get like really unhinged and like want to take things out on you because like they're getting heat for something that they did. And so anyway, so I actually deal with a lot of screamers, and
if that happened on my show, it would be a bad day for us, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be a bad day, but what I've come to do when that happens is like, is to just let them scream. Like, I don't know, I grew up in a screaming family. Screaming is my love language, I guess. I don't know, but I just let them. I'm just like, I hear you, and then usually at that point, like, if they're still going to talk to me, it's like, okay, well, you got it out of your system. Okay, can we move on? And like just saying I hear you and kind of not treating them like they're an idiot, and like yes, you have some valid points. I mean, I don't even necessarily say that because sometimes they don't. But, but just like sort of expressing that you're hearing them. Usually people who are, a little unhinged will move on, in my experience. But yeah, hopefully that never happens on either of your podcasts.
Oh my gosh.
I take a month off, I think.
That would be the person, I would be crying then. I'd be like, what did I do?
I usually laugh, unfortunately.
I love that. Okay, so I sort of alluded to this a minute ago, but I have recently had two guests who they shared in their memoirs, family dynamics, maybe sort of an alienated parental figure. Somebody else shared about, they wrote about their husband in this memoir, and I'm going to try to be vague so you won't listen and be like, that's who Ronit was talking about. But it happened twice recently where I sent the questions. They wrote about this, an estrangement, and also about a relationship, a very romantic relationship. The person was in their book, and then they said to me, I'm not comfortable talking about this if we can skip this question. And I thought, well, I mean, the snarky part of me was, you wrote a memoir about it, the part that's like a little more New Yorky and cynical. But then I thought, well, the comforting educator in me, I had to, of course, what am I going to say? You have to answer the question. But it did make me think, if any of you have written memoir or are thinking of it, that's a whole nother thing. And you kind of have to be willing to know that people are going to read your pages and maybe ask you about them. And certainly if you're lucky enough to get some big deal and you go to some big book opening, you could probably tell your handlers, tell no one to ask me this question. But in general, people during book promotion are going to ask you these questions. And if someone asks me a question that I don't want to answer, or I can't really figure out the answer, I start the answer and then I pivot to what I want to say, kind of like what you were saying. I'll answer it on my terms. So people could do that, but they just flat out say, I don't want to talk about this person. And I didn't say anything to them about it. I'm telling you about it. But I thought that was kind of an odd thing, to pour your heart out on the page, to get a publishing deal, to want to sell books, and to go on a podcast that you or your publicist pitched for, and then say, I'm not going to talk about my husband. I'm not going to talk about my stepmom. It's just interesting. Although I respect their need to not complicate their lives further and not to hurt the feelings of someone further. I understand that.
You know, it's so interesting because I have a client who will talk about anything on her podcast, but then I will cut clips for my clients and for social media, and she's like, I don't want to talk about that on social media. So it's like the opposite, where she'll like spill her heart out on her podcast. She gets a good amount of listens. They could be listening, but she doesn't want it on social media. It's interesting.
Yeah, but see, this, I would say, and this is just for all of us, I wonder what you'd want to say about this. I'll give you the mic in a second. No. Like, everything we do is traceable and findable, and I don't really think we can compartmentalize ourselves that much. Everything is everywhere, and if someone is looking for something, they'll find it. And, you know, so it's interesting. I get that, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of like me saying, I'm not going to put pictures of my family on Facebook, but here are some on Instagram.
Right.
Why? Why do I think that's safer? It's all the same. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, you know, in my memoir, one of the things that I really did, like, there's some, like, sort of scandalous stuff about me in there, which I don't think is scandalous at all. My memoir is about addiction. And I put some stuff in there that was, like, that people, like, actually give me crap about online all the time. Like, and I'm just like, okay, here's a whole chapter about that. Here's everything about it that you could possibly ever want to know, so quit asking. So yeah, that's much more my approach, but you know, I know that's not.
Yeah.
I'm more of a confrontational person, I think. So
I like that though. Read it in my memoir.
exactly. Here it is. Here's a link to buy it. I do that a lot online.
That's so funny.
I should do that, but no one's yelling at me yet.
We'll work on that. Okay, so I want to talk about the follow-up questions that we ask, because these are the questions that are not planned. These are the ones where, like we were saying, someone says something and we're like, let's go in deeper here. And I think that there's a lot of magic in those. We get some good answers. So how do you recognize when you've found something worth exploring and when to dig deeper versus when to let it go or let it breathe?
I think, I mean, I'll just give an example. I mean, I think it's when you can tell when somebody's excited about talking about something, you know, as opposed to giving like the rote answer. And we were interviewing, the city council member was on, we were having this conversation where like Sandeep, who's kind of to the right of me, like I'm a flaming leftist, I guess, and according to him. So we had the city council member on, and she's like, you know, they're kind of like agreeing on like, oh, Seattle's so dumb about race, but they're agreeing about like a policy, and like she's sort of saying, well, all black people in my community support this policy, and he's like, yeah, like, you know, white liberals are so stupid, whatever. And I'm like, yeah, okay, that's fine. I don't agree that like, you know, your community is a monolith, and you know, we can talk about that, but like I'm more interested in talking about this part about like the white liberals and like Seattle being incredibly white, and like the way that, you know, we can't talk about race in this community like the same way that I think more diverse places can. And like I'm from Houston, I'm from a much more diverse place in here. And so anyway, so we kind of reached a commonality where we're all talking about the same thing and not necessarily agreeing completely, but coming at it from different angles, and that became the conversation. To me, that's just much more interesting than like, you know, do we want more police and cameras in historically black neighborhoods, which was kind of the topic like that we had played out at that point, you know. And so that just became a really fascinating, deeper conversation, because I think, I mean, I'm going to give myself credit for this. Like, I think I identified something that was interesting that we were all like had a more nuanced take on than just like cameras are good or cameras are bad.
Sure. Yeah.
I find that when my guests pause, seem to be thinking, and I recently moved to on camera, so Hayleigh and I had been talking about it. I was audio only for a long time, and I liked that because I thought I could listen better if I wasn't looking at someone or seeing my face. I thought I'd be like some like weird bird with a tinfoil piece, like, woo! So I just was, no, I'm not gonna do video. And then I just switched. And so now I'm seeing people, which is nice, but you do have to do your hair, you know, or like, you know, maybe not look super tired or puffy. And so I have to get ready for interviews now, which is a little annoying, but I do like the on-camera thing. It does get me more, you know, traction on Substack and YouTube, blah, 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 all that stuff. So recently I noticed some Post-its behind one of my authors, a whole bunch of color-coded Post-its, and that is sort of a writing organization tool. And so I asked her about them, and then she picked one off and told me about them. And so that's a moment of entry that you don't plan, and then you can just relax into it. It can break the ice, and you can sort of absorb the moment, or I can just say, oh my gosh, like, I don't know why I'm so slow today, or I messed this up today. So I try to kind of disarm people that way. And I would say that if I'm talking and I'm kind of going through my questions and they expand on something, they slow down, they look up, they kind of are like dreaming or thinking for a minute, there's room in there to kind of open up the question. Like in regular life, you just try to be in regular life. And in fact, some of my podcast guests recently are newer podcast guests, and they said, oh, this is my first podcast interview for this book, or they're older, this is my first podcast interview ever. It's a debut memoir at 75 years of age. And I just, I said, don't worry, just pretend you're talking to one person, pretend it's just me, not all the people who might hear it, or think about someone else you're talking to that you really are close to. And I do that too when I go on podcast interviews that I'm worried about. If it's a bigger thing, I just try to really focus and pretend I'm talking to my sister or just that one person, and that really settles me and calms me down.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I just have one last question before we get into the Q&A section. And it's for the podcasters in the room, anyone who wants to start a podcast or has a podcast, who wants to create compelling questions. What is one interviewing or storytelling technique that they can try in their next episode? Mm-hmm. And if you have a podcast, raise your hand just so you can see around the room, like how many podcasters are in here. Love it. I love it. There's so many.
I mean, this isn't really about coming up with questions, although like the who, what, when, where, how, why is always a good guide. Like, don't ask open-ended yes or no questions, because sometimes people will just say yes or no. But what I have found in interviewing in general, and you can do this on podcasts because you can edit it if it doesn't work, is just once they've finished talking, like just don't say anything. For, especially if you're talking about something personal and they're sort of ruminating on it, just don't say anything and just have that uncomfortable silence. And like maybe it just becomes an uncomfortable silence and you move on and you cut that out. But a lot of times, if you just like allow yourself to have that uncomfortable moment, that's when you get like the real answer or the deeper answer. And I'm saying this is like, I mean, I don't interview people who've written memoir. I'm sure this is even more true of people writing about their personal stories. But I mean, even in just, I write about a lot of, sensitive issues, and I talk to a lot of people who have been through traumas, and yeah, I mean, that's just one of the most effective, but one of the hardest to do techniques, I think. And it really, I couldn't do it for a long time because I don't like a silence. I like to fill a silence. I think everybody does. But yeah, I mean, but it is incredibly effective, and I would definitely suggest trying it.
Yeah.
That is funny because I was going to say something almost like that, but you reminded me, this reminds me of the silent close. Do you know in sales, have you heard about the silent close? So I was in sales I was in sales for a long time when I was acting. I did telemarketing, and it was like commission only in New York City, and I don't even want to tell you what I was selling at midnight. But anyway, that's another book, I guess. But anyhow, they would say, give them the pitch, wrap it up, and then you know what you would say? You'd say, how does that sound? Don't say anything. You just say, how does that sound? And then when they were training you, they'd be like this. Because if you say something, you're going to lose the sale. And then and I do that with my kids. My husband laughs. He's like, how does that sound? I'm like, I think you should go clean your room. How does that sound? So I feel like it doesn't work with them. But I think with you, what you just said is like you ask the vulnerable question or they answer it vulnerably, and instead of rushing in, you just let it sit there. And it's hard to be in that vulnerability and that quiet, especially for podcasters. But I think that's so valuable. And I would just add my own answer is probably follow your curiosity, which is if someone answers something that I find I'm trying to do what feels interesting to me. If I'm interested in it, I hope that people will hear that interest that I'm podcasting to that are listening, and I kind of know what the people are looking for that I podcast for, and so I follow my curiosity. And so if they say something that I find really interesting, I have to be brave sometimes and follow up and ask. It's easier for me to go with my list of questions or be like, we are supposed to do an excerpt now. But I have to just say, oh, that's so interesting. I was surprised that you said that. Did it surprise you when it happened like that? Or how did you manage to get a 2-week retreat on an island with beautiful crystal blue water? How can I do that? So, yeah, That's my answer.
I love that. And I think mine would be, I don't mind asking the same question twice in two different ways if I don't get the answer I'm looking for first. And again, I can edit it out if needed, but I kind of do, like, I know what I'm looking for and I know what kind of answer I'm looking for. And if they don't give it to me, I will just try again. And if that doesn't work, all right, then it's just an awkward moment. But whatever, it's just like, that's what editing is for. So that is all the questions I have. I am so grateful that you're all here, and I want to open up the floor to some Q&A. So, okay, I see a question back there.
I'm going to, because this is for my community, if you don't mind, so I'm going to give this on camera.
Sure.
But Hayleigh, to your point about, this is more so a comment and then follow-up question.
Yeah.
The person who says, I'd rather it be long form on my podcast as opposed to short form on social media, that clicked for me right away simply because you have control over your own narrative. In social media, so many people can clip up your content and change your own narrative. But to that point about storytelling, when you are, and I don't know that you probably have experience with this, you may or may not, but again, for my community, when it comes to sharing stories that are integral, because we're living in a time where there's so many people doing, podcasts right now and doing all kind of different approaches to their podcast. Not truthful and not truthful. Research, and because you all work in journalism, what is your best advice for anyone when it comes to keeping the integrity of your podcast? And then as a podcast producer, what is your best advice for keeping the integrity and not diluting the content?
That's a good question.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, so I mean, are you asking like when you're interviewing someone and making sure that it's staying true to what they're saying and how they're presenting themselves?
As well as the research, if you were also
Yeah.
researching and keeping the integrity of the research and putting all of the questions together, making sure you're getting an accurate story and communicating that to your audience.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And I think either when I'm interviewing on my own podcast or editing someone's show, like I truly do want them to tell the story in the way that they want to tell it. And I never want to make someone feel like a gotcha moment of me asking them a question that they weren't expecting or taking it in a direction that they weren't expecting, So I would say reading the guest, reading the person that you're interviewing, or reading through the interview. This is why I love video, is so I can see how the other person is reacting. I can kind of tell if I'm going in a direction that they don't want to go in, or if they are really lit up about one thing, I'll dive in deeper there. So I think that my clients do that well too in their podcast, and I can see that when I'm doing the editing and production of it, when someone like leans in the moment that they're supposed to. And I think that's why I try not to stay on script too much, like have like this plan, like this strategic episode laid out, because people do want to lean in different ways, and I want to let them. I want to like help them explore that in the podcast. And last point here, I don't want my podcast episodes to sound like all the other podcasts that they've been on. So I want to let them go in a direction that they want to go in. Does that make sense? Okay.
And I'll just say, I mean, when I am interviewing somebody, it's usually about a discrete, like it's about a topic. So we're not going to talk about everything about them, but I am like one of those people that over prepares for everything. And so I am going to like probably listen to them, on another podcast, or I will go, and if it's like an elected official, I'll go and, make sure that I have heard what they have to say on this issue in the past. And I just do a ton of research. And the other thing is like, I mean, our podcast, we're very biased, I would say. I mean, we sort of wear our biases on our sleeves about what we, our political opinions or whatever. But the most important thing, and this goes for my journalism too, is to be fair. It's not to agree, and it's not to not push back, but it's to be fair to absolutely every person who I talk to, because, and in my writing and the finished product, because that's just like baseline, decent journalism and decency. So even if I'm like, even if you're proposing a policy that I think is going to be incredibly harmful, that's my opinion, you have your opinion, and I want to present your opinion in the fairest possible way and not make you look bad on purpose.
All right, any other questions? Yes, Rachel.
Do you have an opinion and or advice, I guess, on interviewing in person versus virtual? I'm not sure if you guys do in person or virtual, but anything you want to comment there?
I do all virtual.
Okay.
Thought about doing in person, but have done all virtual now. What about you two?
I have done in person because when I launched the podcast in the old days, my first podcast, it was in person. I had a podcast I co-hosted a long time ago, and we went to a studio in Pioneer Square to do that. We had a producer and everything. It was really nice. I just had to do some research, and it was a very feminist podcast. It was very fun. And when I launched my own, Zoom and all that stuff was not really happening the same way it is now. So I rented a studio several times for my guests, and it was fun. You get the big fluffy, headphones, and you get the studio sound. It was amazing. And then I don't even remember how. And then I interviewed someone. I was on location in DC for something, and I interviewed someone there, which was really fun. We went to his place. That sounds weird. My husband walked me in, and he picked me up after. But we just were at his podcast setup. What's wrong with me? And so anyway, but then somewhere along the line around COVID, or even just before that, I started doing it on, there are all these platforms to record online. And I just was like, why did I do this before? I don't need to pay for a studio, to pay for that space and get there all the way and find parking in Capitol Hill. So I'm exclusively virtual now. And even if I go to a writing conference, I thought once, I'll do some interviews in person with people, but we're all too busy going to the writing conference. So it's a good opportunity, but I just stick to my schedule at my computer.
We do live events, and I love those. And honestly, if I had the wherewithal and money to have a studio and have people come in, I would so prefer that. I love interviewing people in person. It's just, I don't know why. I'm old-fashioned. Just for a regular interview, if I have the time, which I often don't, I would rather sit down in person because it's just a better experience for me personally. But yeah, we mostly do online, but I would prefer to do in person if we could.
Yeah. Wait, did I just say I've never done an in-person interview? What am I doing right now? That's kind of weird. Okay. And last month, right? There's these two guys back here who actually have a podcast studio in Bellevue. So if you ever want to learn more about that.
Oh,
I just met them tonight.
I would love to go to Bellevue.
Yes, better than Cap Hill for parking, I will say. Okay, other questions? Yes, Nicole.
Have you ever decided either during an interview or after an interview that it is just not going well and it's not something you're going to share?
Yeah, and it's so awkward.
Yes, it's so awkward. You want to go first?
I don't have this happen too often, but I've had interviews that I've heavily edited because I thought that they were just purely bad, and I don't want to put my audience through that. I have people that love listening to my show every single week, and I'm like, they will listen to this. But I've never had an interview so bad that I was like, I cannot publish this, to be honest. I feel like you have.
I don't know what to think about that, Hayleigh. Yeah, I had one. I had one a while ago when the podcast started, the Let's Talk Memoir one, and I was like, there's nothing here. What's that expression? Not a nothing burger, but there's nobody is home. It just was it was literally, I can't disclose what we were talking about, but I was I kept waiting for the meat, the spice, the heat. Yeah. There was just nothing. And I wasn't excited that much about the book or the writer, but she was in my community. I said yes. And my mom listens to my podcast, and she told me, she's like, I didn't get it. What was she even talking about? And I was like, I know, Mom. And then not long ago, someone pitched me, and I like to represent authors who might have published themselves, or they're not exactly writers, but they published a memoir. I do that too. Mm-hmm. I try to do the gamut. And she pitched me, and she had a different kind of experience, and she had a different identity than I had on the show in a while. And I was like, this book isn't formatted well. It's a weird Kindle thing you just sent me, but okay. I only looked at a couple of pages, and then I read it, and I was like, there's almost no excerpt I can actually take that's more than 2 paragraphs long. But I was like, well, maybe the interview will be okay. And I interviewed her, and it was just, there was just no elaboration on the answers. She just didn't. And I was like, what am I going to do? And she was in the folder or drive for a while, unknown, question mark, when. And then finally I was like, I can't publish this. And I just wrote to her, and I'm sorry, but I told her that the sound was not good, that which in part, that was kind of true. It it had been a little choppy. And I said, I'm so sorry. And she understood it because she's not really a writer or a podcaster. So I think she accepted it. And I said, she said, if anything changes, let me know. And I feel really bad about it, but I also have a show, right? Like it's not that people are going to bang on my door or stop paying me. No one pays me. It's just that, I can't. So.
I mean, I haven't really had that experience. We have had to edit people down sometimes when they're being really boring and long-winded. But I will say, I mean, this is like, to your point, pre-interview, I would not do. That sounds very tedious, but I do think it's good to see if they've done podcast appearances before and, or been just, if there's anything you can glean from their ability to just talk and string together sentences. I mean, usually it's not a problem, but sometimes it is, obviously.
Yeah. I have a few clients in the wellness space, and sometimes people will give wellness advice that is not aligned with their advice. And so that's more of where...
Do they edit it out?
Sometimes I will edit it out if the rest of the conversation was good, but sometimes it's so anti... I have a client who has an anti-diet culture podcast, and sometimes people will give advice that's not aligned with that, and that's a time where she just has to stop them and be like, this is not the point of the show. So... yeah, but okay, I saw another hand go up. Yes.
I was wondering, and this is for all three of you for sure, is what are you guys doing routine-wise before an interview? Are you drinking tea? Are you jumping up and down? Are there things that you're doing to get ready for that interview?
Yeah, can I?
I can just do a really quick answer. But this is real. I put on a bra. That's not helpful for you. And I brush my teeth and I put on some lipstick just so I feel like I'm going to an event.
Oh, cool.
Okay, that was not so long. I could wait. So I know you're asking right before the interview, but in order to interview, I have to read their book. And so sometimes I get a bottleneck. This past week I had to do 3 books, and I was running behind last week. And, I read them and I got the questions to them a couple of days in advance, but I was like, So I think I read the book, I do the questions, and then on the day of, even if I'm tired or cranky, which happens, because we're giving of our time, right? When you're podcasting, or even probably when you're editing, that's our energy and our time. And that's especially if you're in conversation with someone, you have to be present or it's not going to go well. So I do have to I don't jump up and down, but I get my head on and I realize it's time to be super generous. It's time to just be present, let my other stuff go, just put it on the back burner, make my list later. And, or if I have a lot in my head, I'll make a quick list before I get on so I know I'm going to pick up my other stuff later. I just have to really, I said it before, but compartmentalize, because I'm trying to do something in a generous and vulnerable way, and it won't work if I'm a jerk, and we've all been in that. You've answered phone calls when you don't want to talk to someone, but you have an appointment on the calendar. So, I just have, I guess, I don't know if that was helpful.
Yeah, I think for me, I don't know if I do anything specific, but I do hope that I can read their energy pretty well and just hope that our energy is vibe. But I do think it's interesting. Sometimes I'll interview someone who's more chill, and then I pick up on that, and then I'm more chill. Whereas then I have interviews where it's a very anxious, high energy person, and I'm like, ah. So I think I don't. That's not the answer to your question, but I think it's when I get on there, I kind of find out where it's gonna go. Yeah.
Yeah, but basics like coffee, water,
Coffee,
glasses.
of
I
course.
like the list. I do lists every day. I do multiple lists every day. That's all that's mostly in my notebook.
Yeah.
And it's good to get that out of the way. So you're not whatever little thing that you might be worrying
Yeah,
about.
I'm like bumper cars in my head at all times. So yeah.
All right, let's do. Okay, so many questions. All right, let's go. You first, yes, Sean.
Okay. This isn't really about storytelling, but as newer podcasters, I'm curious if you have an aspirational guest. You all talked about a lot of people reaching out to you. If you have an aspirational guest, what are the things that you can be doing to actually get that guest to be on your podcast? Versus just kind of passively lots of people wanting to be on the podcast.
I like that question.
Flatter them. I mean, yeah, I usually, if I want somebody, we were trying to get, oh my God, what's his name? Peter Sarsgaard on the show. And it didn't end up working out, but I was reaching out to his agent, and just praying that, the stars would align. But yeah, I mean, I'm generally just this is the greatest movie of all time. I mean, which I actually do believe. This is, again, about my Shattered Glass podcast. You guys should really watch this movie. But yeah, I mean, I am usually like, you know, they're doing me a favor. I know that. I'm not going to like sell it like, oh, this would be so good for you. You know, I'm like, this would be like just so amazing for, you know, for our listenership, and they would just get so much out of it. And yeah, I mean, usually flattery. It didn't work in that case, but it does work a lot.
Yeah. I recently had Ellen Yin on my podcast, and she's just like this amazing business owner, podcaster. Her podcast is Cubicle to CEO. And I pitched her a year ago when my podcast was launching, and she said no. And I was like, fair. I followed up a year later, and she said yes. And I think you just have to ask. I think I tell my clients that a lot, where like, if you have these dream guests, just ask. They're just people too, and they want to be on podcasts, so.
Yeah, I would say, so Melissa Phoebos is a memoirist who's had a couple of books out, and she was just on my show. And the reason why she said yes is because her assistant answered her book, The Dry Season, was coming out in paperback in June. So she said yes because she can promote the paperback, which she needs to have good sales numbers for. But that was a pretty big get for me. And Maggie Smith, the poet, has been on my show several times, and that was because of someone connected us. And then there's an older writer called Vivian Gornick, who's like a memoir icon, and I wrote to her agent, and I just was like, she's 80-something. And then I got an email back, from Vivian Gornick, and she was on my show, and I was like, I can die now. That is fine. But I will say that something I think we've talked about before, Hayleigh, is sometimes the really big guests do not, a lot of times, mean you're going to have a lot of downloads. And I've had a couple of people who, their people pitched me. They had over 100,000 followers on Instagram, and I was like, oh my gosh. And I said, of course, I'll read your books, of course. And I had them on. I gave them the white glove treatment. And, you know, I think their people are going to go follow them on Instagram. They might like the post that I collaborate with them on, but that doesn't mean they're going to go to my podcast and listen to my interview. They already know their person, right? So I don't like to chase that kind of stuff as much. There's still a couple of people that would be really lovely to have on just to say I did it, but I know it's not going to necessarily like grow my show.
Yeah. Okay. I think it's time for us to wrap up here with the the questions. And come ask us questions afterwards.
Can we just say where you can find our stuff?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, go ahead. Do you want to do it first?
Yeah. Just look for Seattle Nice on all your podcast platforms. My book's available wherever books are sold. And I'm at Erica C. Barnett on all social media.
Mine is Ronit Plank everywhere, and I have a Substack called Let's Talk Memoir. I answer craft questions, and it's free. It's free to subscribe. Nothing I do is you have to pay for, except my classes. My memoir is in the local bookstores here. I also narrated the audiobook, so if you're an audiobook person, that's about my mom leaving to follow a guru and how she left the family.
I want to just say thank you all for coming out to the second edition of Podcasters Northwest. I have the date set for the next one, and you will all be the first to get the link. It's July 22nd. It's a Wednesday, and it's going to be at the Stables in Georgetown, which is this very like historic horse race building. It's really cool. So check out I'll email you all tomorrow with the link to that, and then also the links to connect with
And
you.
I forgot to say thank you.
Oh, well, thank
Thank you for doing this and for having us.
Yeah.
So fun.
Thank you. Yeah, this
course.
is exciting, and it was exciting to meet in person, like both of you.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you all so much. Come ask us questions. I know there were still some hands up, but I don't want to hold you hostage here in these seats. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me in the Podcast Cafe. I hope you're leaving with fresh ideas and inspiration to take your podcast to the next level. Remember, podcasting is a journey, and you don't have to do it alone. I'm here to help you every step of the way. Let's connect. Be sure you follow me on Instagram at Espresso Podcast Production, or visit espressopodcastproduction.com for more tips, resources, and behind-the-scenes insights. I'd love to hear about your podcasting journey. If you've enjoyed today's episode, make sure you hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you're feeling extra generous, I'd love it if you could leave me a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps more podcasters just like you find the show. Until next time, grab your coffee, keep creating, and I'll see you back here in the Podcast Cafe.